Welcome, everyone. We are so glad to see you here. We see many faces that are known to our series and lots of new ones. And welcome to people that will be listening to the recording. I am absolutely delighted today to welcome Margarita Tarragona. I am the curator for this program, and usually Caroline is the host and she's the one that interviews everyone, but today I'm stepping in for her. Margarita and I go way back, as Margarita said yesterday. We have had many roles together, and so it is an absolute delight to welcome you today, and I'm very excited for what you have to share, especially now. During this time. So let me tell you a little bit about Margarita, and then we'll hear her presentation. We are also recording this, and you will get her slides, her blog that overviews her topic today, and then also a little bit more about next week and the wonderful guests that we have as we continue. Today is the last series on our last webinar on our series around mental health. You know, it's been Global Mental Health Month. So I wanted Margarita to come and be with us today during this month. She just finished her semester, so we are so lucky that she was able to be here, especially as we end mental health focus in this month. So the title of what she's speaking about today is called Making Meaning Through Stories: How Writing and Conversation Can Help Us Live More Meaningful Lives. And Margarita is an expert in the field of personal narrative and positive psychology. Research about finding meaning in life shows that one of its elements is coherence, or understanding one's story. In this webinar today, Margarita will talk about how we can explore our life stories and help other people do so as well through writing and conversation. We will discuss how to apply research findings about expressive writing and positive psychology in our personal lives and also in our work. Margarita also teaches therapists and coaches and professionals, and she also has a private practice and runs a supervision group with the International Positive Psychology Association and so many other roles. Here's a little bit about her. Margarita is calling in from Mexico, and she's a psychologist who specializes in applying positive psychology. She received her PhD from the University of Chicago, and she obtained her clinical training at the Family Institute of Northwestern University and the Ackerman Institute for the Family. Tarragona is president of the Mexican Positive Psychology Society and a lecturer for the University of Pennsylvania. And ETAM, which is the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. Margarita has also, for many years, been faculty at the Whole Being Institute for our Mexico programs. And she also, I must say that personally, there is an extra role that I've shared with her, that I was Margarita's teaching assistant when she offered her narrative story and coaching for us through the Whole Being Institute a few years ago. And I'm just planting a seed. I hope you'll come back and renew that program. I think there'd be so much interest in it. So welcome, Margarita. You can unmute yourself. Welcome everyone that's joined us.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you to JCC and Whole Being Institute. I'm delighted to be here. And I've never thought of you as my teaching assistant, Phoebe. You're a fabulous colleague, and I learn from you every day. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I will ask you just a few questions as I'm kind of standing in for Caroline today. She always will ask first the presenter, your affiliation with Whole Being Institute. First, how did you find it, and what is your first connection to that? And then I'll ask you a few more things and we'll get into the slides.
Well, my first connection was through Tal Ben Shahar and my dear friend Arlene Solotkin, who is the partner for the certificate in positive psychology that was offered some years ago here. So that's how I came to know Megan and you, Maria, and to be able to attend the certificate program and then to create a version for Latin America that we ran for several years.
Right, wonderful.
I've also taught with you programs through the Whole Being Institute.
Right, wonderful. So many shared roles. And the other thing is about this topic that you're going to talk about today. Is there a particular way in that you found narrative in particular that really seized the topic and all the different applied interventions that there is in positive psychology? What is that kind of evolution of your own story around narrative and finding this topic?
Okay. Well, I found first about narrative psychology when I was training as a family therapist. As you probably know, narrative therapy and therapies that were based on dialogue and conversation initially were part of systemic therapies or came from that area. And what I liked a lot about it is that it just made a lot of sense that we have different ways to tell our stories and that the way we tell them has an impact on how we live. And also like that narrative therapy, like solution focused therapy, like brief therapy, like dialogical therapy, were all approaches that were not focused excessively on pathology, that actually were very critical of certain pathological ways of understanding people and families. So there, later I saw how that would fit very well with positive psychology, because they were also not pathology based ways of understanding life.
Yeah, so you already came in with that lens of really wanting to look at what's strong, what's working,
Right.
so you could highlight that in addition to all the foundation of your clinical training and background.
Well, and I didn't mention that many years ago, before I did my PhD at the University of Chicago, where Mike Csikszentmihalyi was one of the professors. So he was studying happiness and meaning. Actually, one of the things he studied were themes, life themes, which ties into narrative. So for many years, I saw positive psychology as a research endeavor that didn't have many applications yet. And then, fortunately, things come together, and the field has developed many applications in therapy and coaching.
Yes.
And many
Wonderful.
like cross-pollinizations between therapeutic approaches and research data from positive
Wonderful.
psychology.
So that applied aspect is also something is what we feature here on this series. And of course, Csikszentmihalyi was known for his flow research, and
Exactly.
that was all probably percolating as well at that time. Okay, so Margarita, I'm just going to have you take it away. I'm right here.
Okay.
We are going to be just, I think, so engaged with this material. So there you go.
Thank you very much. I was going to say I'm going to share my screen, which is probably the most repeated phrase of the last year. We're always sharing our screens. Okay, so as Phoebe said, the topic we're discussing today is how through writing and conversation, we can enrich our stories and how that helps us lead more meaningful lives. Martin, I'm sorry, you know that our species is called Homo sapiens. And some authors say that we could just as easily be called Homo narrativus, because storytelling is such an important part of being human. Whenever I think of this, I think that when I was a little girl, I used to love to go to the National History Museum in Mexico City. And there was one like replica of Neolithic people around the fire talking, and this idea that that even our oldest ancestors already engaged in storytelling, I think is very powerful. We have it in all cultures, in everywhere. It's a part of being human. What is a story? From a psychological perspective, a story is a series of events that are linked over time. There's a temporal dimension, and this notion that our experiences are linked. We don't experience our life as just disparate events. For us, we connect them in different ways. How we connect them, the frameworks that we have to connect them, are not just our own creation. They come from the culture that we're a part of, from the place that we have in society, the time in history in which we live. But we do have like frameworks that help us connect our experiences. And then we have, of course, our own family and personal experiences. Stories from the literary perspective usually have like a beginning, obviously, developments, many developments, climax or climaxes, and then resolutions. And this is true for ourselves too. But of course, we don't have just a single story. We have many different stories about ourselves. Tell me about your experience in college. Tell me what it was like to grow up in Australia. Tell me about how you trained as a coach or as a therapist. There's many, many stories that are all intertwined in our life. And I love this picture. This is a picture of J.K. Rowling's draft about the subplots of Harry Potter and the Order of Phoenix. And I love it because this is so true of us. We have many subplots in our lives. We don't have like one linear life, but we have many things going on at the same time. And actually, in terms of application in therapy and in coaching, authors that work from a narrative perspective talk about the importance of having thick stories, that is, of having many threads of our identity and of our experiences woven together, not just what they would call a thin description. That's a term borrowed from anthropology, but a thin description is understanding a person in a very simplistic way. And that's usually not helpful for us as professionals or for any of us as people. We experience our complexity and we expect others to also understand the multifacetedness. Is that a word or I just made it up? That there's many facets in our life. Some authors like Dan McAdams, whom I'll mention later, he's one of the most important researchers in the field of personal stories, says that the beauty, he uses that word, the beauty of narrative is that it allows us to integrate complex data and complex information in a way that makes sense, in a way that is coherent and that is more powerful than presenting, numbers or graphs. Those are important too, of course, but for human experience, nothing like stories. And by the way, I should mention an author that has actually been a guest in this series, Dr. Michael Steger, who's a psychologist who studies meaning in life. And he has found that there's 3 components to leading a meaningful life. One has to do with purpose, with having some important goals that we strive towards. The other one has to do with feeling that our life is worthwhile, that it's good, that it's valuable. And the third one has to do with coherence, to feeling that we understand our life, that it makes sense to us. And even though stories can be useful for those 3 components, perhaps the component of meaning in life where story is most important is this area of coherence. The way we structure and we build our life stories helps us understand our stories. I have always thought, you probably know, that all therapeutic modalities are about as equally effective. And this is very intriguing because, the conceptual underpinnings are so different. Some are based on the idea that our earliest experiences determine our present. Some are based on the idea that our reinforcement history and our distorted thoughts are what contributes to the way we're feeling now. Others take a systemic approach and look at the way people interact. So the underpinnings are very different, but the results of the well-established therapies are the same. And I think one of the reasons that this may be is because all therapeutic experiences are opportunities to retell and tell and edit our stories. We may do it in different ways depending on the angle that the therapist takes, but they're all opportunities to tell our stories. Sorry, this was a little detour, but I just wanted to share that. So one important idea about narrative and narrative psychology is that when we tell our story, we're not just, conveying information about something. We're not just transmitting information. When we tell the story, at the same time, that telling has an impact on our identity and on our experience. Some people say you can never tell the same story twice. And that is true. The facts may be the same, but you might choose to highlight certain aspects. You might remember things you didn't remember before. There's different ways to tell this story, and the way you tell it has an impact on how you experience it. For example, I read a book many years ago called You Can't Get Over Divorce by Patricia Love. What a great last name, isn't it? And she says, she talks about her own experience getting divorced, and she recommends, this is a book written for women, that women should have two different stories about their divorce. The long story that they share with their friends, with the people close to them, and the short version that you tell somebody that, you know, an acquaintance you run into at the supermarket at the exit at the cashier line. So why is this important? Because she says that if you tell, you know, the full story with all the painful details, the sorrow, to everybody that asks you how you're doing, the telling of it makes you relive all that pain. So I love that idea that you can have different versions, and according to the context and to whom you're talking with, none of the versions are untrue. It's just that they have different qualities depending on the impact they can have on your identity and on you. So this idea that as we're telling, we are simultaneously reinforcing or tweaking our story is very valuable. The father of narrative psychology was an American psychologist, Jerome Bruner, who lived to the ripe old age of 101, I believe. He died only a couple of years ago. And he made a very important contribution because he proposed the notion that even though our brain in many ways is like a computer, our brain or our mind does something that computers couldn't do. I'm not sure if they can now. I think they don't, which is to create meaning, to generate stories that are meaningful. And one of his most compelling ideas is that we become the narratives that we construct to tell our lives. As I was saying before, telling and our narratives are not just, you know, a record of our experiences, but that what we include in the stories that we create about ourselves has an impact of who we are. So, for example, if you're always stressing about what you do wrong, what a terrible mother you are, the mistakes that you've made, that over time, and not even so much time, starts to color the way you talk about yourself as a mother, maybe about the way you behave with your children. So it can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then you're more aware of the mistakes that you make in your child rearing. So the way we tell our stories has an impact. It's not just, you know, anecdotal. It really has an impact on our relationships. And the good news is that our stories are constantly being edited. So nothing is written in stone. To a degree, I think that there are some life experiences, some tragedies, something so powerful, some physical things that there's no much room for rewriting. But in the world of relationships and experiences, there is a lot of leeway for interpretation. For example, a colleague that I was talking with just a couple of days ago, he specializes in applying positive psychology to organizations. And he was telling me about a conflict that erupted in one of the teams that he was working with. Somebody came to him furiously saying that he was very angry because one of his coworkers had opened his drawer, and that he thought that was such a violation of his space and so disrespectful. So my colleague, the psychologist went to talk to the person who opened the drawer, and the person who opened the drawer was surprised. He said, "Oh, I didn't realize that that was offensive to him." And he said, "You know, I'm the 12th of 12 kids in my family, and we've always shared everything. And I just thought that I could open the drawer because we're such good friends that that I could trust, that we had what we say in Spanish, confianza. We had like a trusting relationship." So then they spoke and the other one understood, he apologized. But it came to my mind as an example among so many in which we can interpret an action or an event in different ways. So one of them, the story was such a disrespectful, individual, and the other is we're such good friends that I can go into his private life. So, and I'm sure you can think of examples every day in which we can tell different stories about the same aspect. And as I say, I think there are exceptions. There are areas in which there's not a lot of room for interpretation. So I wanted to share with you a quote by one of my favorite people, and one of the persons that has influenced me the most in my life as a therapist. Her name is Harlene Anderson, one of the founders of dialogic and collaborative practices. And she says this: the self is an ongoing autobiography. Or to be more exact, it's a self-other, multifaceted biography that we constantly pen and edit. I love this idea for many reasons. Because our self, our identity is ongoing. It's not like like a geological thing that it's there, there's yourself, and it's set as rocks, as sedimentary rock. It's something that is always evolving, always in movement. And it's something that we write that is multifaceted and very important, that we write it with others. Your story is not completely of your authorship. The way other people see you, what other people tell you, the relationships that you have, of course, that has a huge impact on how you see yourself. And I think this is so useful for in our own life when we feel stuck or when we feel burdened, to think that it's ongoing. We're in the process of always becoming. And how we also write it in collaboration with other people. So who are the people in our lives who help us and be the kind of person that we like to be, our best self, or get closer to our ideal self? And how we can constantly edit it, either through writing exercises, through our conversations with friends, or through our conversations with professionals like therapists or coaches. I apologize, I was excited about animation at some point in my life, and I don't know how to do without the animation, and I find it distracting. But anyway, the idea from Harlene Anderson is that our conversations and our stories have an impact on our relationships and on our identity, and they are all influencing one another. For example, a certain kind of relationship, a closeness with a friend, allows you to tell a certain story that maybe you wouldn't share with anyone. And the fact that you share that story enhances or strengthens your bond with that person. And the way that person responds to your story has an impact on how you see yourself. If she's supportive, if she highlights how well you're handling it. So there's this constant interaction between conversation, and conversation is made up of stories in good part, our relationships and our identities. For example, I like this picture because it reminds me of my childhood. It's not my family, but forever since I was born till I was almost 40, after my grandma died and then her sister kept on the tradition, my family met for luncheon every Saturday, every single Saturday. It was a big table of 24 people or more. And I was always hearing stories of the adults in the family, and then started to share my own. And what I wanted to highlight with this is that it's not always a structured, organized process. Okay, let's sit down and rewrite your story. Maybe in therapy you do, but in everyday life, without noticing it, we're doing it. We're constantly sharing our stories, and these are having an impact on the way we relate to each other and how we relate to ourselves. So don't worry, you're doing it anyway. But if you're doing it anyway, it can be useful to be deliberative about it in some instances. So when I think of how can we be deliberate about the way we have conversations that can enrich our life, that can help us flourish, I think there are certain compasses that can help us guide flourishing conversations or enriching conversations. One of them is to have conversations that are guided by appreciation. You probably know that Tal Ben-Shahar has a phrase. He says, "What we appreciate appreciates." It may sound redundant, but if you think, for example, of currencies and how when a currency gains value, for example, the peso used to be 22 pesos per dollar, and now, fortunately, for me, not for you if you're visiting Mexico, it appreciated. Now it's 20 pesos per dollar. So it appreciates, and it means that it gained in value. Likewise, the things that we appreciate in our life, in our partners, in our family, in our colleagues, become more salient in our life, in the way we see them. So a lens of appreciation is very useful. So asking people about, what they've done well, what are they proudest of lately, what has worked out well for them despite the suffering they might have endured, what's good and new and different. For example, in solution-focused work, I rarely dare to do this. It seems too bold for me, but a lot of therapists start every session saying, what's better than last week? Working from the assumption that something must be better. But so any kind of question that is guided by appreciation of the other person usually ignites a meaningful conversation, because I think we all appreciate being appreciated. Another important ingredient of conversations that can enhance our well-being is positivity. You probably know the work of Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, who's also been a distinguished guest of this series. And she talks about micro moments of positivity resonance, those brief moments in which we connect with another person, either with a smile or in laughter, or sharing a moment of awe, or if it's somebody close to us, a moment of love. Those moments in which we share positive emotions, or we share recollections of positive emotions, are moments that can also spark meaningful and important conversations. Work by one of Dr. Fredrickson's former students, now colleague, Sarah Algo, has looked at the qualities of positive relationships. And one of them is the sharing of positive emotions. Also, Sarah Algo and Barbara Fredrickson have studied that people who are very happy with their lives prioritize positivity. What does this mean? That they don't just wait to see if the day brings moments of fun, or if that day they might experience hope, or if that day they might feel curiosity. They actually look for opportunities, for contexts, circumstances, or people that will make it more likely to experience fun, hope, curiosity. So this prioritizing positivity, I think, can be applied to our conversations as well. For example, if somebody says, how was your trip to New York City? And they say, oh, it was great, but on the way back, the flight got delayed, and then we ended up staying all night. I think most of us would focus, oh, well, it must be horrible to stay at the airport all night. And many of us would let go the part about the trip being wonderful. So if we pay attention to the positive experiences of others, this can help us have stronger connections. And the third element that is crucial to, I think, any good conversation is curiosity. Harlene Anderson, my mentor whom I mentioned, says that when she was a little girl, her nickname in her family was Nosy Rosie, because she was always curious about everything and always asking questions. And that is what has made her a fabulous therapist, because she's always curious, and she approaches people from what she calls a not knowing approach, not assuming that you know that person, not assuming that you understand what's going on, but having what others have called a humble inquiry, to ask from a position of being really interested in learning from the person, whether it's your friend or your client in coaching, or even your student. I was reading a wonderful book by Richard Boyatzis called Helping People Change. And in it, he tells the story of a third grade teacher that asked her third grade students, who are 8 or 9 years old, what is something you would like your teacher to know about you? And students said incredible things that she didn't know ahead of time, that I get bored easily, or that I really, need to sit in the front row, or what, many things. So in any conversation, to be guided by curiosity often guarantees a good conversation. When I was thinking about today, for some reason, I was reminded of an experience I had on an airplane once. Before the era of cell phones, so when people actually had books and magazines on board to spend the time. So I had my People magazine, and there was a guy sitting next to me. And you know how you can tell when somebody wants to start a conversation? And I kind of held my People magazine even higher to convey that I was not interested in conversation. But he started to speak anyway. And he started to tell me, I was on my way to California. And he told me he was on his way to California to visit his mother, who was dying, and that he knew this was going to be his goodbye. And and how he had to save a lot of money. He told me what he did and how he had to save and borrow money to make that trip to say goodbye to his mother. And he started to tell me about his life and where he had grown up. And just remembering it gives me goosebumps. And we spoke for quite a while. And at the end, I felt, wow, so connected, so privileged that this man shared such an important moment in his life with me without even knowing me. And then also kind of embarrassed with myself that I had been for a moment more interested in reading about the life of the stars in Hollywood than about a real person who was sitting next to me. So I'm sure that you have many stories like that yourselves, how when you open yourself, in this case, I was not even curious, I was just mildly polite, but then my curiosity did get ignited. So I think whenever we show curiosity to somebody, that usually opens the door to a conversation that in itself brings us connection. I feel I've spoken a lot already, and I don't know if this might be a good, before I go on, are there comments, reactions, questions that we might address?
And if you want to come off the slides just for a bit, Margarita, then we can go back on. Indeed. Wow, you have shared so much with us. And I just want to say we have a lot of people on now, and it's just wonderful to see all the faces and welcome people listening to the recording. So laying out the framework, really what I'm hearing is the focus, that lens, that it's inextricably linked to our reality. So when we really capitalize and amplify the good, when we increase our positive emotions, and also when we activate curiosity, we know that's connected to the learning center in the brain, the mindfulness aspect. There's a real positive intention that you're bringing to how you're listening and how you're co-creating as you help people shape their story. Did I summarize that in a
absolutely
precise
Phoebe.
way?
Absolutely.
And so much of what you're talking about is very connected to so many different threads of research. Michael Steger, who you mentioned, and also I think about the self-perception theory of Daryl Bem. As we tell the stories and we have that reflected back, we start to have a different experience of our own life and life story. So yes, let's see the chat if there's something that has sparked an interest so far, and then we have lots more to cover today. Anything that in particular has jumped out to you, or maybe even a question that you have for Margarita right now? It could also be an example. She talked about being on the plane, and just really shifting to being open to the experience. We know that curiosity is one of the top strengths, Margarita, that corresponds to happiness and well-being.
Happiness, right.
So when we tune in, yes, Karen, she says the not knowing approach reminds me of the beginner's mind.
Absolutely. Karen, I don't know if you would like to add something to that, Karen?
Karen is a speaker on our series. She's also a specialist in mindfulness and meditation. We have, yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Just simply to sort of validate, and it's so similar when you bring a beginner's mind to whatever it is that is arising as you walk through life. And it's absolutely the same thing, really, as bringing that sense of curiosity. And I love the idea of using it in conversation, of bringing it to conversation. So thank you.
Wonderful. Karen, thank you so much. And I was reminded also of Tal Ben-Shahar's mentor, Dr. Ellen Langer, and her research on mindfulness. As she describes it, it's the openness to the experience and noticing the new. So we have also a hand up, Mina Simhai, who is one of our formal faculty and alumni. Mina, if you want to unmute, is there something you'd like to connect?
Sure. Well, thank you, Phoebe. Margarita, it's good to see you.
Great to see you, Mina.
My question is, if you know of any research, or maybe if you've done any work, or know of people who have looking at this idea of narratives and kids who have learning disabilities. Since a lot of them, they are hearing all about what's wrong with them. And, a lot of times the learning disability also comes with a lot of upside that kids are frequently not really aware of.
Yes, I don't know about research, but I do know that's actually one of the things that we've encountered very often when we work, for example, with adults who have attention deficit disorders, that their whole life they've heard messages like, you're bright, but you should try harder, you should work more, you have potential that you don't develop. And that erodes your self-esteem and your way of understanding yourself over time. I'm sure there must be research I'm not aware of, but in terms of working with kids from a narrative perspective, with kids that have different difficulties, among them attention difficulties, I would recommend the work of David Epstein and Michael White. They have several books about working with children. One is called Playful Solutions to Serious Problems, which I think the title in itself is wonderful. And I'm trying to remember a more recent one also about working narratively with children.
So Michael White is one of the exemplars in narrative as we have. Thank you, Mina. We have Lisa says it's good to write the story down when it happens and then see how what you remember changes. And that is a wonderful lead in to your next section, I think, on the webinar. So let's keep going.
Thank you. Thank you very much. When you told me, Phoebe, to stop showing my slides for a second, I felt, oh my God, what am I going to do with my slides? I think my identity is too tied to my slides nowadays. Okay, great. Thank you all for your interest and participation. Okay, so there's ways, in addition to those general direct, I don't know how to call them, guidelines about curiosity, positivity, appreciation, there's also specific kinds of conversations we can have. For example, those of you who are familiar with positive psychology probably know the research about how important it is to respond to other people's good news, not just to respond with compassion and empathy to bad news, but also to respond to good news in a way that has been described as active, constructive responding. Our responses can be passive or active, depending on how much energy we express, and they can be constructive, that is, they can reinforce, validate, strengthen what people are telling us, or they can be destructive. They can criticize, invalidate, question what people are telling us. So what researchers have found is that when we respond in ways that are active, that is, with emphasis, with energy, and constructively in a way that is appreciative, that is reinforcing, and we ask questions about the person's good news, that strengthens the relationship and brings about more well-being to the parts that are here. An exercise I often do with my students in college, and it's a lot of fun, is that we ask, would you be willing to play with me, Phoebe, since you do drama? Okay, so let's enact each of these responses. Let's say you're my mom, Phoebe, and you're working on your computer, and I come home, and we'll go around this. We'll go from, you'll give me a passive destructive response, an active, no, I don't know, that's not good. I'm trying to think. Okay, passive destructive, passive constructive, active destructive, and we'll leave the best for last, okay?
Okay.
So first you'll offer me a passive destructive response. Okay, so let's see. Mom, guess what? I got a B+ in my biology test. Last month, I got a B-.
Oh, so I was expecting an A. You sound so excited about it, but really, I think you could do better, Margarita.
Oh, okay. Then we'll make it.
I think that was active.
Okay, yeah, well, you have to make it even better. No, that's okay. Okay, so we'll make it. Right. Do you think that was active destructive?
Yes, that was active.
So let's go for passive destructive.
Okay,
Mom, guess what? I got a B+ on my biology test. Last month, I got a B-.
Oh, that's so nice, honey. I have to go now. So go tell your dad about it.
Okay, thank you, Phoebe. All right, so now we'll make it passive but constructive. Okay. Mom, I got a B plus on my biology test. Last month it was a B minus.
Oh, okay. Listen, I just have to finish this email. Can we talk about it in about 5 minutes?
Okay, great. And now, drum roll. No, drum roll. Okay, so active constructive. Mom, I got a B plus in my biology exam. Last month it was a B minus.
Oh, that's fantastic, Margarita. Let's sit down right here. And I want to hear, what does that feel like?
Oh, it's great. I was so worried, Mom. I was so worried I
Yeah.
wouldn't make a good grade.
Wow. And how did you make that happen? What are some of the things you did?
Well, remember I stayed with my friend Tracy last week. We studied
Yeah.
and we did a mind map, and that really helped me.
Wow, we really put in a lot of effort. And what is something that you are discovering about yourself now that you've had this?
Well, I actually kind of like biology. I didn't like the
Mm,
plant stuff, but now that we're studying
wow.
animals, I really like that part.
Oh, wow. I really look forward to hearing more about how this interest evolves.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Phoebe.
Yay.
Wonderful. So even it might seem artificial because we're acting, but I really have lived it. And for example, young college students that do this for the first time come back surprised by how generative just responding in a constructive and active way can be. Another structured or systematized way of having conversations that can lead to flourishing or can enhance well-being is through appreciative inquiry. I know you've also discussed this or have it mentioned in some of the talks in this series. Appreciative inquiry is a method that was originally designed for working with organizations with large systems. And it can be adapted to working with a family, with a classroom, even with a client in therapy or coaching. And it consists of, as its name implies, inquiring or asking questions that are based on appreciation. So you start by asking about what's already, let's say it's a company that is going to rebrand itself. You start by the phase that's called discovery, that has to do with what has been good about this company already. What are its greatest successes? What are its most important products? What do its clients appreciate the most about this company? And you do that with it can be with a whole company, it can be with 200 people, or, it's even been done with whole cities. So you spend a lot of time gathering what's already there, what's already working, what's already good. Then this takes a couple of days. I'm just, doing it so fast. The next stage has to do with imagining, knowing what you know about what's wonderful, what's already strong and luminous about this group. What would you like it to be in the future? So they might say, well, we want to improve this product, or we want to also offer this and that. And then the next stage is designing. You ask the people who are the stakeholders who work for that company, how can they make that come true? What are the steps they would have to do? And then they have to walk the walk and take the steps in that direction. And what's at the center of this is the belief that all systems that are alive, that all people, couples, families, have a positive core, something that's central to them, that is valuable, that is meaningful, that can offer something to the world. And the questions that we ask in every step of the way have to do with tapping into that positive core. Okay, and you were saying, Phoebe, that the question about writing can lead us to this final stage of our talk today. And one thing I wanted to highlight is that you've probably heard the phrase by Rick Hanson, another famous positive psychologist, who says that our mind has Velcro for what's bad and Teflon for what's good. So in the kinds of conversations we were discussing, we're trying to build a little more Velcro for what's good and less Teflon for what's not so good. And this is true for writing as well. So we use the metaphor of writing our stories when we talk about telling our stories and how we're constantly in our minds creating stories. But there's also the very literal meaning of it, writing down our experiences. And this is very powerful. I'm sure most of you know it from your own experience in your life, and maybe you use it as a therapeutic or coaching tool as well. The most influential and probably most prolific researcher about the impact of writing is Dr. James Pennebaker from the University of Texas at Austin. He has done hundreds and hundreds of studies about the impact of writing. Most of them, or the beginning of his studies, had to do with writing about traumatic experiences because he was a specialist in trauma. So he developed a method that later came to be known as expressive writing, in which he asked people to write their deepest thoughts and feelings about a traumatic experience. By the way, this is a picture of a recent earthquake in Mexico City, unfortunately. What he found is that if he asked people just to write about their feelings about a traumatic experience, the effect was not as powerful. If he asked people just to write about their thoughts about a traumatic experience, the effect was not as powerful. What was most powerful was when people wrote about both the cognitive and the emotional aspect of their experience. And what he found is that when he had people come into cubicles at the university and follow these instructions. For the next 4 days, I would like you to write about your very deepest thoughts and feelings about the most traumatic experience of your life. In your writing, I'd like you to really let go and explore your deepest emotions and thoughts. You might tie your topic to your relationships with others, including your parents, lovers, friends, or relatives, about your past, your present, or your future, who you have been, who you would like to be, who you are now. You may write about the same general issue or experiences on all days, or of different traumas each day. All of your writing will be confidential. So the idea is that people have to write for 10 to 15 minutes uninterruptedly, 4 days in a row. He has adapted this to different situations. It doesn't have to be a trauma. If you've been fortunate enough not to have trauma in your life, it can just be about a difficult experience, something that you feel stuck in, a dilemma. Phoebe has reminded me that through the confinement and COVID-19 pandemic, Pennebaker and his team offered prompts for people to write about their experience during the pandemic. And you can find that on Dr. Pennebaker's website. So what are the benefits that he has found? They are innumerable. Perhaps the most surprising ones are that writing about difficult experiences not only brings about psychological well-being, but also physical well-being, that people who write about their trauma go less frequently to the infirmary if it's a college, or to the doctor, and even have better cardiovascular health and better immune system. They've actually measured the number of T lymphocytes in the blood before and after the 4 days of writing and a few months after finishing the experiment. And people produce more T cells after writing, which is very impressive. He's studied people who have been let go from their work, and the ones who write about it have greater chances of finding a new employment. There's a myriad of findings about the importance of this. I'm going to hurry up because I'm so excited I didn't see the time. But this is to symbolize that our heart gets healthier when we write. But other people, Dr. Laura King from the University of Missouri, has found that writing about positive experiences also brings well-being into our lives. She has asked people to write also for several minutes, 4 days in a row, about extremely positive experiences in their lives. People may write about the birth of a baby, about a wedding, or the day they graduated from college, or the day they reached the peak of Mount or whatever they're climbing, about very special days. And it's found that when we write about those very special occasions, our levels of well-being also increase. She has also asked people to talk about the future and has developed a very famous and well-researched way of writing called the best possible self-exercise. The instructions for it are as follows. Think about your life in the future. Imagine that everything has gone as well as it possibly could. You have worked hard and succeeded accomplishing all of your life goals. Think of it as the realization of your life dreams. And then when people think about that, she asks them to describe in detail where they are, what are they doing, who they're with, how they're feeling. And when people write about this best possible self, they also experience increases in hope, in positive emotions, in well-being. This I just going to show very quickly to illustrate that the Oxford Handbook of Positive Psychology Interventions, which to date is the most comprehensive compilation of positive psychology interventions, has 40 interventions that are based on writing. I didn't intend to go through all of them, just to illustrate to them. For example, the very well-known gratitude journal, or the writing 3 good things, or writing about your current experience in college. If you're a college student, writing about meaningful childhood experiences and how they have influenced who you are now, writing a forgiveness letter to yourself, writing your beliefs about a difficult situation, just to give you a sense of how many positive interventions are based on writing. Okay, and I wanted to share, to end today, an idea that I've been thinking about as I was preparing for this talk with you today, and for which I'm very grateful. Going over the different ways in which we can have productive, positive conversations and writing experiences, I think that we can think of 2 axes. One has to do with whether our story is being spoken or written, and also whether it's structured, where it's being written or spoken in more or less structured ways. For a while I thought, well, but it's not really they're more like 2 dimensions. Conversations are either spoken or written. But I thought that nowadays, I don't know about you, but I often have like hybrid conversations where I'm talking with somebody and maybe I send them something in a text message. So I think the boundary between written and spoken relationships and conversation are being blurred. So, for example, when we're having small talk with somebody we've just met, the conversation it's all spoken and it's kind of structured, because we know we talk about certain things like the weather, what do you do? You wouldn't ask them about very intimate things. When you're talking with friends, your conversations are usually unstructured and spoken. Some kinds of therapy are extremely unstructured. Traditional psychoanalysis, the therapist will not say anything and the client will just freely associate. Other forms of therapy tend to be more structured, but not completely structured. For example, responding in constructive and active ways, like Phoebe just exemplified, is one way of having a pretty structured spoken conversation. A work interview is even more structured. There's usually an interview questionnaire that is being followed. And I also mentioned appreciative inquiry. When we move over to the more writing side, for example, there's certain kinds of therapy in which the client writes, instructed by the therapist, and then brings it back and what they wrote is discussed in the session. Or journaling is something you can do in a very non-structured way. Letters are usually semi-structured. You can have online chats. Expressive writing that we just described by Pennebaker is a pretty structured way of working. Write about your deepest thoughts and meanings and feelings about a traumatic experience, or write about your ideal best possible self. There's some journals that have specific prompts, and this is called interactive journaling, to increase gratitude or to improve your confidence, and workbooks that work in the same way. So I hope this is helpful to you to think, how can you have more or less structured ways of inviting people to share their story with you, and also sharing and editing, revising your own story. What all of these things have in common is that they help us create meaning. And I would like to end with a quote with one of the authors I've mentioned, Dr. Dan McAdams. When he's asked about identity, what is our identity? He says that it is an internalized and evolving story of the self that explains how I came to be the person that I am becoming. I love this because it's not how I came to be the person that I am, as if the person that I am were already a complete product. It's a story that is internal. I have it. I've adopted it. I've processed it. It's evolving. Even if I'm old, it's still evolving, and explains. Here's the story part, because it explains where I came from, how I came to be the person that I am becoming. And I think this idea of becoming is so beautiful because it instills hope. It addresses that part of ourselves that wants to develop, that wants to realize our potential, that wants to grow. So I think I will leave it here and have last 5 minutes for comments or questions.
Thank you, Margarita. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. It was
Thank
so
you.
comprehensive, and you certainly embody these practices. I imagine just sitting across the room as, you know,
So
as
much, maybe.
in therapy or in coaching, that this informs you. And I'm sure that these different interventions are placed in a way that are really context dependent. But thank you for the immense scholarship and applied practice. I'm wondering if you think about the pandemic and the narrative, and how, especially now as people are looking back and pulling through, any last reflections? We don't see anything coming in on the chat about narrative practices in this particular threshold moment as we're moving, you know, maybe into more expansion gingerly.
I think we have to be sensitive to the amount of pain people might have suffered. But with people that I work with who fortunately have not been sick or have not lost any family members, we do have conversations, oftentimes spontaneously started by them, about what they've learned, what they discovered about themselves or their partner or their family that they've come to appreciate, what they would like to take with them into the new stage of their life when life starts to be normal. A lot of people are telling me, I don't want to go back to normal completely.
Yes.
I want to have time with my kids. I want to keep on exercising. I rediscovered my spouse and how we still have a lot of things to converse about.
Right.
So I think if we ask questions about the experience that are sensitive to the pain, I wouldn't ask somebody who's lost a loved one, tell me about the best part about the pandemic. Of course not.
Right.
But for people who haven't, I find that many people have experienced like growth during the pandemic.
Yes.
And it's important, I think, through either writing or talking about it, to make that stick. So the inertia of going back to normal life doesn't let that slip away.
Yes. So this whole idea of becoming, that we are constantly in this co-constructive narrative as we live, and again, that it's intertwined with the stories that we tell ourselves, and then how that impacts our experience. Margarita, I thank you so much for today, and look forward to more interactions. Next week, everyone, wanted you to know that we have two special people. We have Nancy Polsky, who's going to be speaking about character strength of forgiveness through the lens of positive psychology. It is a line of thinking and of a whole mindset around forgiveness that is very well researched. And Nancy's going to be speaking about application of that. And then we also have on Thursday, Jody Wellman is coming in, re-entering your post-pandemic life with the gift of mortality. So she has a very powerful frame that she's going to be introducing. So we hope that you all have a wonderful holiday weekend, at least here in the Northeast. We're celebrating a long holiday, Memorial Day. And Margarita, thank you so much. I know your presentation today is really going to impact. We have someone here, Carl, who says that it validated a lot of what he's been learning in his social work, you know,
I'm
really
glad to
looking
hear
at
that,
the
Carl.
narrative and incorporating identity, you know, as a work in progress, if you will. So much today. We're going to send out the recording, the slides to everyone. Thank you for your brilliant presentation and generosity.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And today, Margarita, it really, again, validates that the research around positive psychology during the pandemic has been shown to help people, all these micro practices, including how we cope in an adaptive way. How do we see things through a new perspective? And as you said, how do we prioritize positivity to help us increase our ability to see opportunities, as well as to navigate all the different adversity and challenges. So So
Thank you
Sue is
all.
going to be coming to speak with us in the future. And she says, I realized how writing is helping me recover neurologically as
Wow.
a COVID long hauler. Oh, thank you, Sue.
Wow, I hope you feel
And
better.
yes, and Sue is going to be speaking to us in the future about
Wonderful.
her writing and her work in the world. So taking
Thank you.
all that in, Margarita, active constructive responding was fun to play with you. Hopefully that will inform people. We know from the work of John Gottman that it helps people to, it's the glue that helps people stay together when they can actually receive each other and celebrate the good.
Thank
So,
you.
okay, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you
Goodbye,
so
everybody.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
holiday weekend in the
Thanks so
States.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.